Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DABCC TV. As always, we have a great episode for you, and we have another follow-up episode to a podcast that we just released today, actually, with the Avecto guys. So definitely check out that podcast, but within this video, we're going to show it to you. So I'm quite excited about that because seeing is always believing, and you can learn a lot from a picture, right? So anyway, with no further ado, my guest today is Mark Austin, who is the real brains behind this solution. So I'm quite excited to have him walk us through it because he does an amazing job. So with no further ado, hey, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And let's just dive into the first question. Who are you, and what do you do over at Avecto?
Hi, Doug. My name's Mark Austin. I'm a founder and CTO at Avecto. In terms of Avecto, we were founded 2007, and we're really focused on solving the problem of desktop privilege management. And it's a space called least privilege. Whether it's a virtual desktop, physical desktop, the same problem exists. That, especially in a Windows environment, is that users often are logging on with excessive privileges, and many times it could be local admin rights, which is a fairly common problem. So Avecto was really set up to solve that challenge, and the idea is quite a simple one. It is to enable a user to log on with a standard user account, and instead of giving the privileges to the user, is to assign those privileges to the applications that actually require them. So these could be things like legacy applications, it could be basic administration tasks like connecting printers, and it could even be more advanced tasks like installing software, and even coping with developers who are very difficult to lock down for those reasons. Again, giving them the flexibility to run the applications they need, such as debugging tools, but doing all this within a standard user account.
So you're going to show that to us. So
yeah, sure. We're going to go ahead and show you that, yeah.
Perfect. So let's do it.
Right, okay. So what we've got here is a Windows 7 desktop. I should say at this point that Privilege Guard works on all the operating systems from Windows XP through to Windows Vista and Windows 7, and all the server versions of the operating systems. But I'm going to show you on Windows 7, given lots of people are probably looking at Windows 7 now, thinking about migrating to Windows 7. So I want to show how it fits in the Windows 7 environment. I'm currently logged on as a standard user. The idea here is I'm now in a lockdown environment. Many organizations may be in this position already, but they may feel they're too locked down and that users can't do certain things for themselves, and they would like them to do. And other organizations are in the other position where their users have still got local admin rights or even power user rights, and they would like to remove those rights and get to a lockdown environment, but without preventing the user from doing their job, which is the key here. So what I'm going to do is run a couple of basic admin tasks that are part of the operating system, purely to get the concepts across. So because I'm a lockdown user, if I try to do something like defragment my disk, then when I run this application up, because I'm on Windows 7, then we get a lot of these UAC buttons and prompts built in at the point you try to do something that needs local admin rights. So if I now try to analyze my disk, for instance, if it was on Windows XP, I would be getting error messages telling me I don't have the privileges. On Windows 7, you tend to get a UAC prompt, which will ask you for a local admin password. Now, assuming you want your users to be in a lockdown environment, giving them an admin password defeats the purpose, because at that point they can use that admin password to run any applications they wish, whether it's basic admin tasks or installing software. The idea, what we want to do, is to allow that application to run under the user's account without them needing an admin password, and only elevate the applications that are actually in a policy. So in other words, the IT department is controlling which applications should be given the administration rights. So that's the disk defragmenter. So at the moment, I'm a lockdown user. I can't use this application without an admin account. I'm going to run another example, and this is really just to get across the types of applications that we can elevate. The first one was an executable. What I'm running now is the disk management console, which is an MMC snap-in. And again, this time, I don't get a UAC prompt, but I do get an error message telling me that I don't have sufficient rights to run this application. So another example of an application that a local, a standard user can't run unless they have local admin rights. So what we'll do now is I'm going to switch users to a local administrator on this system to set the policy up. I should say, for those that have listened to the podcast, you'll have heard that we're very tightly integrated with group policy. So the way we recommend you set up our product is to configure the policy settings through group policy, The advantage of that is there's no back-end infrastructure. The policy settings will go out as part of your Active Directory group policy, and all you need to do is install a client on each desktop where you want to control the privileges. Now, in terms of keeping this demo moving nice and quickly, rather than using group policy, all I'm doing is using local computer policy. So it's still group policy, but I'm just using a local policy just to keep things moving nice and fast. So in terms of where we're snapped in, you should be able to see now that I've got the local policy editor running, and you can see that Privilege Guard is snapped in two locations. It's snapped in under the computer configuration and user configuration. So in other words, you can do computer-wide settings, or you can do user settings in GPOs. You can even configure both settings, and user settings will take preference over computer settings. So this demo, I'm just going to do computer settings. So I'm going to open up the Privilege Guard policies. And they're very straightforward. We have policies, application groups, licensing is where you put your licenses. The application groups is where we're going to start in terms of you define the applications that you actually want to elevate. So I'm going to go ahead now and create myself a new application group, and I'm going to call this Basic Admin Tasks. And then all we're going to do is add in those two applications that we want to elevate, which is the disk defragmenter and the disk management console. So we go ahead and we add applications, and before we do so, you can see that we support quite a broad range of application types. Executables, which I'm going to do in a minute with this defragmenter, control panel applets, management console snap-ins, installer packages, all the scripting engines that Microsoft supports, so Windows scripting codes, that's VB scripts and JavaScript, PowerShell, batch file, reg files, and we can even elevate the installation of ActiveX control, which is worth touching on. In a lockdown environment, users can't install ActiveX controls for themselves, which is really good from a security standpoint. But from a practical point of view, most users have to install certain ActiveX controls as part of their job role. And if you take admin rights away from a user, it means that you have to then package those ActiveX controls up and install them for them. What we allow you to do is to put the URL to where the ActiveX controls hosted, the code base. And as soon as the user requires that ActiveX control, they can download and install it in the same way they would have been able to do so under a local admin account. The key here is they can only install the ActiveX controls that are part of the policy as opposed to installing any ActiveX control. I'm going to go ahead now and add in the two applications that we couldn't run under our standard user account. So the first one was the disk defragmenter. So we'll just type the path to that. You could obviously browse for the files. I'm just typing these in for speed. We have various options, and I'm not going to spend too long on these options, but I just want to sort of touch on them because they're worth touching on. Child processes inherit access token. When you're elevating an application, if that application then kicks off some child processes, you may or may not want to give those child processes admin rights. So by default, we'll automatically give the child processes admin rights because you could be elevating an application that's quite complex. It's got a few child processes that also need admin rights. You can actually take that off, which means the child processes will revert back to the user's standard rights. That's obviously more secure, but it does mean that you need to identify the individual child processes if they need admin rights as well. Most of the rest of the dialog is about validation options. So by validation options, we simply mean what rules does our client follow before it will elevate the application. And you can see here that the default is to match the file name. Now, the file name tends to be a secure enough check because your user is now a standard user. So as long as you're elevating something that's part of the operating system, installed in program files, maybe on a secure UNC, then the user should not be able to tamper with the application that's being elevated. So for that reason, the file path is usually a good enough check, and it's certainly the simplest one in terms of you maintaining the policy settings. We do provide some other options as though from a security standpoint if you need them. You can take a SHA-1 fingerprint if you need to. If the application's been signed, you can match the certificate. And we also let you match command line parameters. So if it's a utility program, rather than elevating the application all of the time, you can just elevate the application when certain command line parameters appear on the command line. We also support pattern matching, so you don't have to match a single executable. We've got wildcards and regular expressions, so you can match star.exe, so you can match lots of applications with a single rule. So I'm going to click OK, and that's our disk defragmenter. And we're going to do the same for the disk management console. Now, that was not an executable. It's actually an MSC file, which is a snap into MMC. The idea here is rather than elevating the whole of MMC.exe, which you can do if you want, the chances are you don't want to give the user that much control. So we can elevate individual snap-ins by their MSC files. So I'm going to again type in path to the disk management MSC file. Now, MSC files don't have descriptions, so I'm just going to type in a quick description there. And we've added those two applications in. So fairly straightforward up to now. We've just put the two applications in that we want to assign admin rights to. So what we need to do now is to create a policy within the Privilege Guard policies. So we'll create a new policy. And again, we'll just call this basic admin policy. And policies can be filtered on users and groups from Active Directory. So you can see there that by default we've got the Everyone group. Now, because we're integrated with group policy, and although I'm doing this via local policy, an organization is really going to be using Active Directory group policy. So at that point, you have an awful lot of control on group policy objects themselves, and you have things like scope and management, where you can filter on users and groups as well. So there's every chance you will leave the Everyone group in here and rely on your group policy filtering to actually target the right set of computers and users. But if you want to, you can delete the Everyone group and put specific users and groups in there. So what we need to do now is actually assign the privileges to the application. So I've just clicked on the Application Privileges tab. What we do now is insert what we call an application token, because it's the access token of an application that we're adding the rights to. And all you do is pick the application group. Now, when you've created multiple groups, you'll have a choice here, but I've only created one group called Basic Admin Tasks. You then decide what you want to do with the access token in terms of the access rights you want to assign. By default, we assign admin rights because that is the way we recommend you use the product, is that you take local admin rights away from your users, they're very locked down, and you then assign the admin rights to the applications that require them. We do support various other ways of manipulating access tokens, including dropping admin rights, and that can sometimes be a quick security win in terms of dropping admin rights on applications that pose the bigger security risks, things like the web browser, the email client. So in that scenario, you would leave your user with local admin rights and you would drop it from the applications that pose the bigger security risk. If you do go down that route, we always say that's really a first step in that it's a very simple policy to set up, but you should really be striving for this least privilege approach where the user is a lockdown user and you're assigning the rights to the applications themselves. We can also audit. So what we do is every time one of these applications run now, we'll log an event to the local application event log, giving you the full details of the application, which is really important when we're talking about giving an application privileges. Privilege monitoring I'll come back to later in the demonstration. So we click OK. Because it's group policy, everything's dynamic, so as I'm modifying that, it's already updating the policy. So we can now switch back to our standard user, and if we run those applications now, what we should see is instead of being prompted for a local admin password or getting an error message, we should see that these two applications now function correctly. So if we click the disk defragment and we run that up, and then we click on one of the buttons like Analyze Disk, you should be able to see quite clearly now that that's actually progressing now. No UAC prompt. The user's a standard user, but that application is running with elevated rights. So it's just that application that has the elevated rights. So again, I can stop the operation as well. So all under a standard user account, I can now run an application that requires local admin rights. So if I run Disk Manager now, if I run that application up as well, before we got an error message because I didn't have the privileges. This time again, we can see that the application runs up without any problems whatsoever. I'm just going to run the disk defragmenter again just to point one other thing out, which is really important. And if I start Task Manager, and if we look at the applications that are running the disk defragmenter, I've got highlighted there in Task Manager, you'll notice that the application still runs as the user. Now that's really important. Rather than running under a separate local admin account, we actually still run it with the user's credentials, but with all of the privileges that an admin user would have are assigned to that application. The reason that's important is that often the applications that require admin rights, you actually need the user to be able to access their profile from them as well, in terms of accessing files in their home drives, maybe printing to printers. You want their preferences to go back to their profile. So it's really important that these applications run under the user's account. So we can see there the disk defragmenter, and we can see the disk management, which is actually hosted by MMC as well, which is also running as the user. So at that point, I've shown you the basic concept of being able to take local admin rights away from a user and assign those rights to applications based on policies that are set via group policy objects. So that's sort of the basic scenario. We do have some more advanced features as well, and this is what I really want to move on to next, which is one of the common scenarios we get asked about is developers or power users, but developers is a great example, comes up again and again, where developers, because of the nature of their role, they often need local admin rights. It's very difficult for them to actually work efficiently under a standard user account. And sometimes organizations have tried to use run-as, so they'll give the developer a standard user account, and then they'll use run-as to run applications that require admin rights. Problem with that is that you have no control over what run-as gets used from, you've got no audit trail, and from the developer's point of view, it can be a real problem because the applications that you use with run-as are running under a different user account, so you get all the problems I've just mentioned in terms of it's not integrated in your session, you won't be able to debug an application quite as easily because it's in a separate session, you can't get to printers, so it's not a great way of working. So in Privilege Guard, we introduced a feature that allows you to give all the flexibility you get with run-as, but do so in a way that doesn't have the downsides in terms of you don't need a second account. From the user's point of view, all the applications run under one account, so it's very seamless. And from the IT department's point of view, we have an audit trail, which is really the key to this, some visibility on which applications are running with high privilege levels. So what we'll do now is we'll show you this in action, and I'm going to switch back to my local admin user to set this policy up. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a shell menu item in, very similar to run-as, so very, very similar. So you'll see when we set this up. I'm going to create a new application group, and I'm going to call this shell apps because I'm going to allow these applications to run from the shell integration. And you can put specific applications in here, but I'm going to show you this extreme scenario where you're going to give the user quite a lot of trust, but you will audit them, and that's the key. You are going to audit them. So I'm going to put star.exe in there. So in other words, I'm going to match any application. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go back to my policy, and I'm going to click on the Shell Integration tab this time. And by default, Shell Integration's switched off. I'm going to switch Shell Integration on. And what we have here is a menu item that will appear when a user right-clicks on a desktop shortcut or an executable or any of the file types we support. So, it could be a script as well. Or an installation package. So at the moment it says run with Privilege Guard. You can change that text to anything you want. So I'm just going to add in at the end of that text the word audited in brackets. And we can hide away the standard run-as and run-as administrator command. So I think that's a good idea because unless you're going to actually give the user a local admin password, which defeats the purpose of trying to lock them down, then the run-as can just confuse them now, and they've got two ways of elevating applications, and one of the methods they actually need an admin password. So we can hide away the standard run-as command. We do that by default. What we do now is very similar to the standard part of the policies. We add applications in the shell menu. So this time I'm just going to pick my shell apps group, which will match any application. Again, I want to assign admin rights, but this will only happen when they invoke these applications via the shell menu. And in this circumstance, I definitely want to audit. Before, I was deciding which applications were elevated. This time the user is making that decision, so it's much more important to audit these applications. Click OK, and that's it. So fairly straightforward again to set up the shell integration. We switch back to our local user again, our standard user, and we can see what effect that's had now on their session. Everything's dynamic, by the way, so you probably noticed I'm switching users here. So even with group policy, once the group policy updates, even if the user's still logged on, we support background refresh in group policy. So even when the user's still logged on, as soon as the policy hits the desktop, it's dynamic. So if I now right-click on a shortcut on my desktop, we can see straight away now we've got the Run with Privilege Guard audited option that I've just set up. And you'll also notice that the Run as Administrator option that would usually be available on Windows 7 has been hidden away. So if I show you how we use this now, as a user now, if I double-click Task Manager, so I'm going to use Task Manager as an example because it's a nice visible example, but this could be a debugging tool the user needs to run. It could be a software installation they need to actually carry out. We can see there, because I've just double-clicked Task Manager, I'm running with standard user rights, which is exactly what you'd expect. And because I'm on Windows 7, this button also gives that away, the fact there's an elevation button on there. So when I close that, and I know that I need admin rights over this application, because I've been given this shell extension, it means that I can elevate the application as I need to. If I right-click Run with Privilege Guard, We can see now that it's actually running with admin rights. The elevation button's disappeared. I can see all the processes. So I've now got Task Manager running with admin rights. And the key here is that I've done this under a single account. I don't need a local admin account, a separate account. And everything that I do is being tracked. So every application I run with elevated rights is being tracked. And when users are aware that they're being audited, it tends to change their behavior anyway. So most users are not going to run applications they know they shouldn't be running as part of their job sort of specification. So they'll only run the applications they're supposed to do if they know there's an audit trail being collected. That's the shell integration. So hopefully what you've seen there, Doug, is how we can deal with standard users who may need maybe a couple of legacy applications and some basic administration tasks where we lock them down and we elevate those applications automatically, all the way to power users such as developers, where you want to give them that flexibility to elevate the applications they need to do their job on demand, but to do so in a very controlled way, in a way that the user has to make a conscious effort, and most importantly, to actually have some sort of audit trail to actually find out what's been elevated with high privilege levels. So that's the shell extension. There's one more feature I think that is worth showing you, which is something called privilege monitoring. So I'm going to switch back to my local admin account to show you this in action. And this is a feature that we introduced for a particular reason, but it does have a couple of ways in which you may use it. So if I set the scene in terms of why we introduced this into the product, some organizations are in the position where some of their users have got local admin rights. So it might not be all of their users, but they've got a lot of users with local admin rights, but it's not everybody. And often in those situations, they know why those users have local admin rights. They know why they need them in terms of certain applications. So in that scenario, it's fairly straightforward to set up Privilege Guard in the way I've just done now and to elevate the applications that require admin rights. But we do come across a lot of organizations where almost all the users are local admin rights, potentially all of the users. It's been that way for a long time. It's very historical. No one's quite sure why the users need local admin rights. They just know they do. And what they need really is a way of discovering which applications actually require those admin rights in terms of if they were to take them away, which applications would fail to run. So we introduced something called privilege monitoring, and the idea of that is that you can actually deploy a passive configuration, a passive policy, that instead of manipulating the privileges and applications, all it will do is to watch the behavior of those applications. So the idea is the user's still got local admin rights, and you would maybe run this for a week or 2 weeks to collect some information. What we will do is every time an application carries out a privileged operation, and by a privileged operation, I simply mean an operation that would fail under a standard user account. So that could be, access to the file system, to the registry, to some kernel objects. It could be interaction with services. It could be enabling certain privileges within the access token that only an administrator would have or a power user would have, things like setting the time or debugging. So we monitor all of that activity. So what I'm going to do now is set up a very quick, simple policy so that we can do that. So I'm just going to back out some of the things that we've done already. So rather than creating a new, I'll tell you what, we'll create a new policy for this. We'll delete that policy, and we'll delete our basic admin tasks. And I'm going to reuse this shell apps group because it's got star.exe in. So I'm just going to rename it so it's very clear what I'm using it for. I'm just going to call this monitored apps. In other words, these are the applications that I want to monitor. So you don't have to monitor everything, but you probably will want to in this scenario. And then I'm going to click on my policies again. I'm going to create myself a new policy as before. So let's call this the monitoring policy. And as before, I'm going to go to the application privileges tab, but I'm going to do something slightly different this time. When I insert the application token, I'm going to pick my application group, my monitored apps. But instead of assigning admin rights, although that would do no harm, my users have already got local admin rights, and I'm not taking them away yet. So I may as well just put passive mode on, which just means that we won't modify the access token anyway. We're just going to monitor the applications with the privileges that are already being assigned to them based on the user's account. I'm not going to audit because audit does something very different. If I was to switch auditing on, what we would do is we'd end up with an event every time one of these applications runs. So that could be quite useful, but we don't get an awful lot of events if we do that. What I'm more interested in is logging an event when an application performs a privileged operation. That way we don't collect all of the applications. We only collect the ones that are performing privileged operations. I'm going to click OK, and that's it. So again, very straightforward to set a policy up. So again, I've done this locally, but that could have been a group policy object on your domain or on an OU, and that would go out automatically. So what we need to do now is, rather than me logging on with a standard user account, I'm going to stay logged on with this local admin account because we want to test this under a local admin account. So I actually want to run some applications. But before I do so, I'm just going to run up another console that we have. So we've got another MMC snapping, which is our reporting console, which we can use to sort of view this information. So you can do two things with the reporting console. You can view the events from the event log. So these events would also appear in the event viewer. These already, I've been running applications that have been elevated. So already we've got some events for the applications I've been running during this demonstration. And we'll also log an event when an application runs up that uses privileges. And the event number we log for privileged operations is this event 112. So already you can see that we've got an event. And the reason for that is I've just run this MMC up that required admin rights. So already we've got an event in there. But I want to run something a bit more interesting so you can actually see what I'm doing. Rather than running an application where we're not quite sure what the behavior is, I'm just going to do some very specific operations to show you how we can capture this information. So what we'll do is we'll run regedit first. And what we'll do is we'll create some registry keys that a standard user wouldn't be able to create. But first of all, what I'll do is I'll create something that a standard user could create just to show you that we don't capture all of the information that goes on, just the important information. So if I, for instance, create a registry key under current user software, we'll create a new key there. That would not require admin rights because it's my own profile. So we wouldn't expect that to show up in the log files. And again, likewise, if I delete that key, that shouldn't require admin rights. If I go to the local machine hive, however, then if I do anything in this hive, then this will require admin rights. So I'm going to create a new key under local machine software, and I'll call this test key. And we'll create a new value. We'll call that test value. So again, everything I'm doing here would require admin rights. And we'll delete the value, and we'll delete the key. I've carried out quite a few operations there in regedit that would require local admin rights. If we go back to our console and we reload the view, then we can see another event's appeared in there. And if I scroll to the right, we can see that it's regedit. Now, if I want to see the details, so the event's great. So we've caught an event straight away that tells us that this application needs admin rights. The idea is that you'll start to capture events of those applications that require privileges, whether they be local admin rights, whether they be power user rights. The idea is that they would fail under a standard user account. If you want to see the detail, then we have the privilege monitoring tab, where you can actually drill down and find out exactly what those applications are doing in terms of why do they need local admin rights. So if we now drill down on regedit, then what we'll be able to see is all of that local machine activity that I was performing. So we can see there that the current user key doesn't appear in there because that didn't require admin rights, but we can see, the key being renamed to test key, the value going in, we can see the value being deleted, and we can see the key being deleted. So it's captured all of that registry activity related to local admin privileges. That's regedit. I'm going to do one more example just to get the point across. So I've shown regedit. It could be file activity. It could obviously be something that's just doing registry activity as opposed to regedit directly. It could be enabling privileges. So let's run up the services console. And what I'm going to do here is actually stop and start a service. So again, as well as capturing information in terms of which applications need admin rights, by running privilege monitoring, you're also going to find out potentially what your users are doing, which you don't want them to do, which is the very reason you want to lock them down. Maybe a user stopping their antivirus engine or doing something like that. Something again that's the reason you want to take the local admin rights away. So if we scroll down here and let's stop a service that won't cause us too many problems. So we'll pick on the print spooler and we'll stop the print spooler, and then we'll start the print spooler again. So again, that's something that a standard user would not be able to do once I've locked them down. If we go back to our report and we reload, then again, we've got an entry in here for the services MSC. So we can see again that the users run the services MSC and they perform some actions that require admin rights. And if we double click, then what we'll see here is some activity that the actual services management console is carrying out itself, so you can see any manipulation in the registry. And we can also see that it's enabling a specific privilege, increasing its base priority, again, which is something a standard user account wouldn't have. And then more importantly, we can see that the print spool has been opened as a control service, which is how a service gets stopped. And we can see the print spooler being started again as well. So we capture all that information. So you can see this can be really important, quite sort of important information in terms of troubleshooting applications and making sure that if you are about to elevate an application for a user, is the behavior okay? If you're a little bit concerned about the way the application behaves, then delving down into these logs can be really useful. That's privilege monitoring. So, like I say, the main reason that it was introduced into the product was this idea of discovery. There is another way that this could be used, and the example I give is the policy we set up earlier for a developer, where we've given them the shell extension and the ability to elevate applications on demand. Now, we're obviously going to audit that activity in terms of raising an event every time an application runs by the shell menu. But it could also be useful that you actually turn privilege monitoring on, so you can actually just turn it on for any applications you want. So that way, if somebody does use the shell extension and they run an application maybe that they shouldn't have, then the privilege monitoring logs can be really useful in terms of troubleshooting, in terms of, what has that application actually done in terms of has it, modified some critical registry keys or overwritten some critical system files. It can also be useful, if you like, as a deep level of application forensics to complement the auditing facility as well. That's privilege monitoring. So I'll really sort of give you a run through all of the core features in Privilege Guard. There's one other thing I'll sort of touch on very briefly, which is we are integrated with Active Directory Group Policy, which includes resultant set policy. And, we're integrated with the Group Policy Management Console and Advanced Group Policy Management. So all the things you'd expect with being a group policy-based product. So if I run a quick RSOP query, now I'm just using local policy, so again, not something you'd probably do for local policy, but it's purely to show you the reports that we can generate. So I'm just going to do a default query, which will just run against this local policy. And then if we just do, we open that up, we can see Privilege Guard in there. And what we get is if you've used the GPMC, which I'm sure lots of you that are watching this video would have used the GPMC, then what you'll see is that we produce reports in exactly the same style that you're familiar with. So we can see here that this is the policy that I have set up at the moment. So we can see here the sort of passive policy to sort of do privilege monitoring. You can obviously see the product's licensed, and we can see the application groups, and we get the detail on the applications. So that can be really useful from a troubleshooting perspective in the fact we support RSOP, so in terms of both logging mode and planning mode as well. So I think at that point I'm going to hang back over to Doug. Hopefully you've been able to see today exactly what Privilege Guard can do in terms of seeing it in action.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. Wow, what do I say? There's a man that knows his product. So that was a very impressive demo. So very, very impressive technology and product also. I do have a quick question, and I asked a slew of questions in the podcast, guys. So if you want to learn more about sort of some of the benefits and just more about the technology in general, definitely refer back to our audio podcast where I have Mark and a gentleman named Tony Boland who works with them with us to talk about the technology. But Mark, is there any type of applications that don't work with this? Are there any scenarios that that you've run into that just don't work?
Not at all. We've not come across anything, and the reason for that really is because what we're doing is we're elevating privileges in an application, and we're doing it's really a black box in effect in terms of we don't have to understand the application itself to elevate it, and that we're intercepting applications as they launch. And if they're in the policy, then we're assigning an elevated token that's based on the user's token to the process as it starts up. So the process, we're not really, interfering with the process anyway whatsoever. So as long as the application is hosted as a process, which most applications will be at some point, then we can elevate on the process boundary. So you've seen all the application types we support, not just the executables, but things like MMC snap-ins and VB scripts. And obviously at that point what we're doing is we're looking at the script that's being hosted by, say, Windows Scripting Host or the PowerShell host, and then we're elevating that host as it's running a particular script or the Windows installer as it's installing a package. So everything we do is on the process boundary. It's not a level that will interfere with the application.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Mark, thanks again. And one more quick question, and that is, if someone's with us now and they're watching, they say, "This is amazing. I want to learn more, and I want to download an eval." What do they need to do?
Well, again, they can go to our website, so www.avecto.com, and on there they will be able to register for a download. Or you can register to sit on a webinar where you'll see something very similar to what I've done now, but obviously you can ask questions that are relevant to your environment. So that's probably a good way to go as well as a webinar. Or you can, like I say, you can register for a download. Very straightforward, and we can give you a 15-day eval, and you can play with this yourself in your own environment on as many desktops as you want to.
Well, very good, very good. Mark, thank you again for this great demo. Very, very, very good job.
Thanks very much, Doug, for your time.
Okay, so that concludes another successful episode of DABCC TV. As always, I want to thank my guest for today, Mark Austin, one of the founders and the CTO at Avecto.